Hello everybody. Today's video is going to focus on the ecological footprint. We're going to be using the PowerPoint that has been created to introduce that concept, and we'll be going through it pretty much slide by slide and trying to tie together some of the individual components and ideas that are contained within it. This video is just being made right now, so when it is finished and posted to YouTube, that's when you should see a hyperlink on the version that you're getting. And so by clicking on this link, you get to watch this video. But I want to stress the importance of after hearing this conversation about the ecological footprint and about this PowerPoint, that you do go back and explore all the links and all the different concepts that are connected to this PowerPoint. It's rich with materials that are going to be very helpful to everyone as we move closer towards creating a final product for our ecological footprint report. Okay, so we're starting with what is an ecological footprint, and the essence of it, I will say in sort of Mr. Schakowsky's words, is it's a method, a way of measuring our environmental impact. It was actually created, invented. The concept was dreamed up by a couple of professors at the University of British Columbia, probably about 3 decades ago now almost. And so a little bit of claim to fame for Canada and its professors. There are several really good videos that we have found, both and linked both on this first slide and more particularly on the second slide. And before before we go further into this PowerPoint, I just want to stress again that I'll be pointing out in general where these links exist as we come across them, but it's incredibly useful and important for you to go and watch and or explore these different websites and links and videos that are connected here, and doing so will give you a very well-rounded appreciation for what is potentially a fairly complex idea or concept. Okay, so this idea of a footprint, we'll go back to that. This is a metaphor for the impact that humans have on the environment by the way they live. And so if we have managed to live in a way that doesn't consume a lot of resources or produce a lot of waste, then we have a smaller impact on the environment, and we would have a smaller footprint, in other words, on the earth. And so that's sort of the big metaphor that's continually being used throughout here. Our ecological footprint is meant to sort of be a visual way of understanding how much impact, how big our impact is on the earth through the way that we live. And so there are some excellent videos here that, again, I want to encourage you to go and watch along the way here. There's some language here that we've come up with from different places. There's lots of different ways to define what an ecological footprint is. And so here's a couple of the more common ways that we found to describe it in fairly fancy language here. Okay, this concept of load, which is really another word for pressure, the pressure that is being put on nature by human activities. That's one way to think of what an ecological footprint measures. And really what it comes down to, and this is key, it represents the land area that would be necessary to sustain all the different human activities that are going on by, that are happening in the lifestyle of the country or a person. And so what we will come to learn in the next few days through future class activities is that an ecological footprint, it can be used to measure the impact that an individual has on the environment. It can be used to measure the impact that a country has on nature, and it can even be applied to things like companies, for example, corporations, and we're going to take a peek at that through a different activity in the next few days. So the key thing here is that an ecological footprint translates the amount of pressure that we're putting on nature into the amount of land area that would be needed to provide all those resources that are being consumed in that lifestyle, and the land area that would be needed to accept and absorb all the pollution and waste that is being created through that lifestyle of that population or of that person. Okay, and the amount of land area is always expressed in hectares, which is what this little HA stands for in short form. Okay, and so how much is a hectare? A hectare is it's sort of the cousin of what we might recognize more commonly used as an acre. An acre is the U.S. measurement, the imperial measurement. A hectare is the metric version of that. And so in terms of visualizing how much a hectare is, you can see the size of a full-length soccer field plus another sort of 50% or so. That's a hectare of land. And so what the ecological footprint measures, it takes into account a number of categories of or aspects of human life, right? It looks at how or where we live, what kind of household we live in. It looks at the food that we eat, and calculates the impact that has on the environment. It looks at all sorts of other resources that are used to make the things that we buy, the goods and services that we consume in our life. And it also looks, and probably the biggest sort of category in terms of total impact would be the amount of emissions that are created either through our energy use for things like transportation and the like, but also all the things that are made in those factories that consume all those resources and then get, transported to the store, and then we drive to the store and buy them, and all of that transportation emits carbon dioxide, for example, and other kinds of pollutants. And so, and never mind the energy that it takes to run all the machinery in those factories or to run the lights in our houses and our buildings. All of that becomes a part of the calculation as well. Okay, so when you watch some of the videos that are attached early in the PowerPoint, you'll see actually one of the creators of this concept is up on stage, and he uses this analogy as well. The Earth, it's like a bank account. What humans have access to, the Earth's resources, is like a big bank account. And every year that the Earth is providing us a certain amount of resources, and we consume or take out a certain amount of resources, like we would take money out of a bank account to support our lifestyles as humans. And the question becomes, well, are we taking more resources from the environment than the environment can put back in the space of a year? Are we consuming more money than that bank account is getting added to? And if that's the case, then we're eventually going to run out of money. And the argument is made by the scientists who study ecological footprint and the impact on the environment that yes, we will create places in the world where we have a deficit of natural resources, where we are running out of certain resources because we are consuming them faster than nature can replenish them. So again, you will have done some textbook study notes, or you should be in the process of doing some early textbook study notes which talk about these major categories of eco footprints. And so our carbon footprint is a very common way of talking about our energy footprint, because most of the energy that we consume is based on fossil fuel consumption, which then creates carbon dioxide. And again, our housing footprint, our food footprint, and what we buy also all contribute to an overall impact that we have on the environment. And again, so there's some slides here that you can take a closer look at to see which of these categories has a bigger role to play in some people's eco footprints, and everybody's is going to be slightly different, but this is a typical person in North America's footprint and where it comes from, different aspects of their lifestyle. Okay. This is a great visualization, again, of this idea of a footprint, right? And the amount of land area that's going to be required to support the lifestyle of a person or of a city or of a country. And some of that land is actually going to be the ocean, okay, where we get seafood from, for example. Some of it is going to be land area that we consume by building things on it, like our houses and our cities, and we basically pave over land that is no longer able to provide other types of things like food and whatnot for us. We need a bunch of land to provide the crops that we grow for eating. We need a bunch of land to raise the animals if we're eating meat. And the type of meat that we eat will increase the amount of land that is required for pasture. We need a certain amount of forest just to provide the wood products that we need for like timber and paper and those kinds of things. But a huge amount of our footprint actually comes from the forests and other similar kinds of land that are needed to absorb the waste that we create out of the smokestacks of our automobiles and our factory smokestacks and our power plants that burn fossil fuels. All that pollution is going up into the atmosphere, and in order for the Earth to maintain a balance of those gases, forests will actually, consume some of those pollutants. The greenhouse gases can actually, or at least carbon dioxide, can be taken in by forests. And if we are trying to keep up with the amount of pollution we create, then there's a huge amount of forests that we're going to need on the Earth to be the vacuum cleaner to suck up the carbon dioxide that we are throwing up into the atmosphere through our various activities. So how has this changed over time? This is an interesting graph which goes back in time 50 or 60 years at this point, and looks at how these certain amounts of land have grown over time. But the one that by far consumes the majority of our footprint right now is the land needed to absorb the carbon dioxide that is being created through all the different activities that humans are involved in. And we're going to be talking much more about climate change and how carbon dioxide affects climate change later in the course, probably towards the end of the course. It's usually one of the last big topics that we deal with, and arguably one of the most important that we leave you with in this course, and that is climate change and humans' role in it. So this is sort of connected to that. It's an early sneak peek at where we're headed in that regard. But this graph, if you explore it, you can see certain parts of the world haven't had a huge increase in their demand for the amount of land or area that we are consuming, but other things definitely we need more cropland now than ever before. What is, I guess, the essence, the most important thing about this graph is to notice that number one here, that is the number of planet Earths that we have. And this is how much land the Earth is able to devote to human activities sustainably. And what you'll notice is sometime in the 1970s, and this has been replicated and confirmed by a number of scientists that have studied this over time, but basically in the 1970s sometime, humans crossed that threshold. We started to consume more resources and use up more of the Earth's resources and land for our human activities than the Earth could actually sustainably provide. And ever since then, you can see a trend upwards. There were times where we leveled off, where we were steady, and certainly in the early parts of this century, you can see a huge increase there, and then a more leveling off again just at the end of the first decade. So this is going to be a major thing that we'll be talking more about and asking you to think about is, how has human activity affected the ecological footprint over time? This graph is definitely one to study to do that. Here's another neat visual, again, of this concept of how our footprint is basically a collection of all the different little pieces of the Earth that have factories on them and farms on them and forests on them and oceans, where we get little bits of the things, the stuff that we then need to live with, that we buy in order to survive and to meet our needs and our wants. And so when you combine all those pieces of the Earth together, you get a single person's footprint, the amount of land that's required to support their individual lifestyle. And depending on how you live and how many resources are consumed in that lifestyle and how much waste you create in your lifestyle, your footprint can be either bigger or smaller. measured by hectares. Okay, so how much impact can one person have? A lot of that depends on how you live. A lot of it depends on where you live. If you live in a house like this, then you're going to have a much bigger footprint than somebody who lives in a house like this. And recognize that, the world mostly lives somewhere in between these two extremes. And yet, what we do know, and what you will, I think, come to understand as you explore this over the next few days, and we compare footprints of different countries, is that there are certain countries in the world that live a lot closer to this style of life and than there are of this. And those, I shouldn't say there are a lot more countries. There are some countries in the world that are living a much richer lifestyle, and they're having a much bigger impact on the environment than the bulk of humanity, which still lives much closer to within their means, much more sustainable lifestyle, but a much poorer one as a result. A lot comes down to how much waste we create as well. And so this is a link that you can watch a short video about waste creation, and you can imagine then how that also goes to impact our ecological footprint. Okay, so we will begin in the coming days to dive deeper into precise measurements of different countries and compare different countries to each other in terms of their footprints. The U.S. is usually held as one of the big villains in the world. They have one of the highest footprints in the world because of the amount of resources that are consumed by the way they live and the amount of people that live in that country. When you go down to a per capita comparison, though, Canada is not far behind, and we are definitely in the top 10 of footprint nations in the world per capita. And that is definitely not something for us to be proud of. What it means is that we are living, by the way we live, we are consuming far more than our fair share of resources if they were to be distributed evenly and equally around the world. Okay, we would have to live with a lot less than we do. So some of you might remember that when we were doing early mapping and statistical analysis, we introduced you to this concept of combining statistics and maps together and creating something called a cartogram. And so this is a cartogram that shows the ecological footprints of the world. This is probably now 10 years old, so it's out of date and statistically, but the idea here visually is to see how certain countries, certain areas of the world are certainly have a very big ecological footprint compared to other countries of the world. So you see North America here, particularly the United States, but Canada as well. You see lots of Western European countries here, and there's India, there's China, I think that's the Koreas, that's Japan, South Korea there, I should say, and that's Japan. These are some of the wealthier places of the world, and part of their wealth is coming from a massive consumption of resources and creation of pollution, and that makes their footprint bigger. And you can see the other parts of the world are having to do with much less resource consumption. And so the question becomes, over time, how, if we're already living in a situation where we're consuming more resources than the world can create and replenish in a sustainable way, how is it that people living in less wealthy parts of the world, how are they ever going to be able to get their hands on a fair share of the Earth's resources if certain parts of the world are consuming the majority of those resources for themselves? And that's going to be another question we're going to be asking you to consider as part of your concluding assignment. So again, here's some early comparisons between different parts of the world, and what you see here again is sort of by color coding North America. I'm pretty sure, I guess that they're probably including Mexico in that. I'm not sure whether Mexico's included in Latin America or not, but North America, and especially Canada and the United States, you can see that we have a scenario here where we have the largest footprints in the world come from this part of the world, where the way that we live on average in our societies. And there are other parts of the world, like Europe. Western Europe has a much higher footprint than Eastern Europe. And you get over here and you've got Asia Pacific, which is dominated by China and India, but has plenty of other countries in the neighborhood, and also Africa put together here. And again, what you notice is number of hectares per person. So this is a per capita comparison. And the widths of these bars are dependent on the population of these areas. And so, while North America has a very high ecological footprint, we have a relatively small number of people that are living with those resources and that are benefiting from those resources. And the real fear should be for people that are worried about the sustainability of our resource consumption on a global scale. When you look at the number of people in India, China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and other countries in that part of the world, as well as all parts of Africa put together, Nigeria and Egypt and South Africa being probably three of the biggest countries of of Africa. These places would like to live better. They would like to have a lifestyle that approaches how North Americans and Europeans live. And yet, if they were to consume as many resources as we do, the total amount of area that would suddenly be covered by these bars, these bar graphs, would be humongous. And the amount of resources that we would be consuming in that way would quickly overwhelm the world at an even faster rate. And so the real question that is going to start to have to come into mind now, and we're going to be asking to consider it over the next few days, is how can we in North America and Europe lower the amount of hectares per person, lower our ecological footprints to allow people in less wealthy parts of the world to be able to live a little better, and yet all of us still live in a way that the earth can contribute those resources in a sustainable way. And that's a major question that we're asking you to consider over the next few days. So this is just another example of a similar situation, a similar graph. This one here on this axis now is about number of Earths, right? So the way that North Americans live, we would need 5 Earths to provide the resources if everybody lived the way that we do in North America. And what's interesting and quick to note here is Western Europe manages to do that in almost half the ecological footprint, right? And very few people would say that people in France and England and Italy and Britain live impoverished lifestyles or live a lifestyle that is horrible and much lower and devastatingly lower than we do in North America. And yet they have found a way to live a wealthy lifestyle and do so in half the footprint, half the resource consumption, half the waste creation that North Americans are creating. And so that's a quick indication that it's North America that has the biggest changes that have to be made. But even the people in Western Europe are still living beyond the sustainable level of one Earth, which is where that line is. And there's very few places on Earth that are living below that line right now. And so this is the big question of our time, is how can we make changes to the way we live so that we can lower our footprints, especially in the wealthier parts of the world. Okay. A big question then that we sometimes ask students to think about in class, Canada's a resource-rich country. We have a lot of resources, a lot of land, not a lot of people, and so we're very lucky and can consume resources and in many ways take those consumption of resources for granted. But does that mean we should simply because we can? And that's a big question, a moral question, really, that you'll probably be asking as you work on your project at the end, right? How does our footprint compare to other countries? We're going to be studying that a little more specifically in an upcoming activity that's going to have some charts and databases for you to look at that compares different countries' footprints. But a visual way and a general way to look at this would be a very basic way. A wealthy person living with a 2-car garage and a pool and a big-sized house is going to definitely have a bigger footprint than somebody who's living in a very basic house. But the point is that people living simpler lives are definitely using less resources and definitely have less of a footprint than somebody who's living this kind of lifestyle. Okay, so we talk a little bit in class about, what are some of the things that contributes to our ecological footprint, and one of them is the size of our houses. And so there's some interesting data here about how house sizes have changed over the decades in North America. Another major way that we're going to be asking you to consider a little bit more in the next few days is through our consumption of resources for goods and services, for our wants, not just our needs, but our wants. And so we started this whole process off, or very early on, we were asking you to look at different ways that we consume resources and the amounts of resources that are consumed. And now we're asking you to connect that idea to the ecological footprint. Because we consume as much as we do for our wants in North American society, we have a much bigger footprint than anywhere else in the world. Okay, so how do we find balance? Here's another link for you to click on. It's actually a commercial that was created by a different country in the world. And after watching that commercial, I want you to ask yourself if you've ever seen anything like that in North America on TV ever in your lives. And then ask yourself why. Why doesn't our government make commercials like this to get us thinking about these things? It's a really interesting way to see how education can be put to good use here for people that don't realize the effect that we're having on the environment by the way we live. And so fundamentally, we end this part of the presentation with just, again, another visual of just how the impact of our footprint is having on nature. And when we can scare Bigfoot by the way we're living and consuming resources and creating waste, we know that we're having a huge and bad influence and effect on Earth and by the way we live. So at this point, we move to some instructions, which again, I just want to sort of quickly run through with you here. We're getting a little long on the presentation. You're going to be asked in the coming days to complete the quiz in your green booklet. If you got a paper copy, if it's online, it's called the Eco Footprint Project Booklet. And there's a quiz in the middle part of that booklet that you need to try to do as a practice. It's got a bunch of questions. Some of them you might have to do some calculating with, and some of them you're going to have to examine your lifestyle and your family's lifestyle. And I want to make sure you understand here that some of those questions you're likely going to have to kind of blend your family's lifestyle with your own. Like there are certain, like many of you don't drive yet, for example, yourselves, but you get driven places. So you're going to have to sort of do a hybrid analysis of your family's footprint and your own when you're answering those questions. And you can follow these instructions. They're written as clearly as we possibly could make them. And certainly send me email if you are having trouble understanding what you're being asked to do. Do your best to answer all 27 of those questions with an educated guess. It's okay if one or two of them you're kind of struggling with. That's understandable, and just do your best, have a good guess. Fundamentally, what's going to happen is after you've practiced those questions on the paper or in that practice booklet, you're going to be asked to go and take an online quiz using a website, and the link to it is here. And this website is different than the one that was originally used to create that paper document. So the questions are going to be different. You're going to have to log on after clicking on that link using your school email. And likely the next day, you're going to get a little email from them saying, thank you for visiting our site. Would you like to learn more? And you should feel free to click and go into their website. It's got tons of fantastic materials for you to learn more about ecological footprints. Okay, so don't be alarmed that the questions on this footprint calculator site are different than the ones that you were filling out on the 27 in your green booklet, your Eco Footprint booklet. Those were kind of a practice run, and now you're doing the one online, and it is going to calculate. When you're done, it will give you a calculation of your footprint. It will tell you what your carbon and food and housing and goods and services footprint. It'll tell you your total footprint. And what you're going to be asked to do is record whatever results you can here, and And that's it. That's really all we're asking you to do, is record the results the best you can there. There's a link embedded on this page on the digital version that you have now posted that you can use to learn how many Earths you and your family's footprint generate or would need to in order to generate all the resources that you're consuming by your lifestyle. It's usually a very eye-opening exercise. Okay, and so the only other piece of this page that we're asking you to record results or information on are in these 4 boxes. And in essence, they're asking you to define a carbon footprint and a housing footprint and a food footprint and a goods and services footprint. And you can do that if you feel like you've learned enough about this. Maybe your textbook already has questions that or places that can teach you. If you're stuck, we've got some really good sort of short and sweet definitions here that you're welcome to use. And when it comes to the actual footprint report, like I say, that is going to come in greater detail in a few days, some more details about how we're actually going to turn this into a written report of sorts. And so those details will come in a separate email and maybe even a separate video, but we want to remind you that you've got some amazing resources here to call upon. Some of these things we haven't even seen yet, and so they're coming. But for now, I'm going to call it quits. This has been a long video, but hopefully one that will help you understand better how to use this PowerPoint to learn about an ecological footprint. Please do not forget to go back and watch these videos. They are fantastic ways of learning about this. Thanks, everybody. Take care.